Well, it's May the 2nd, and I thought I'd kind of do my own view on the first 100 days of the Biden administration and some of the things that he stated in his non-State of the Union address. Okay, first of all, I just saw an ABC poll that said 64% of the public is optimistic about the future. I guess because of Biden or something. Meanwhile, I think the Rasmussen poll said 36% was strongly in favor of what Biden was doing, and 18% was somewhat optimistic about it, which would, even if you add them together, gives 52%. His latest approval rating in Rasmussen is at 47%, which is down the day after his speech. So I don't know that it's as good as some people are trying to make it out. Okay. So I get into a few issues here. One thing is the ongoing deception that's inherent in all this. I mean, just to throw out one idea is that the whole idea of who's paying a fair share. I mean, most of the income taxes are being paid by the wealthier people. So, I mean, who defines what's fair? I mean, just the current level is unfair, and a few percent this way or that way makes it more fair. I mean, that's sort of very superficial. And this whole idea of massively increasing capital gains tax, the part which applies directly to actual trades of living people, I have my doubts if that will be very productive, basically because I think ultimately after an initial windfall, it's going to dampen off pretty substantially, as I mentioned in my last video. The part that might have some success is this thing of changing the basis for inheritance to not what the stock was worth when the person inherited it, but going back to when the original owner bought it. But even that will only have a significant impact for people for long held shares of stock, and the very wealthy people, in many cases, I think will probably set up trusts in order to distribute among multiple heirs and things of that sort, where the money won't be quite taken out that way anyhow, and the time frame in which the government will receive the money will be greatly, delayed. But that's another one. The other thing, but generally speaking, his $6 trillion spending plan seems to me, which really, I have to remember that I think these are like 10-year cycles, or maybe it's 8. I've heard both numbers, but basically you can divide that up by several years. It's not all going to get delivered immediately. And a lot of this stuff is not really at all oriented toward growing the economy at all. And I think that a lot of the taxes and stuff and the inflationary pressures that this stuff will create will probably be more detrimental than helpful to the typical person. Meanwhile, the Democrats, and not just Biden personally, but the whole Democrat movement, and to some degree, I don't personally blame Biden that much for it. I think Biden is sort of an avatar for the Democrat Party that they chose to put up, which would make them look less threatening. I mean, is Biden himself really making any of these decisions? I mean, in the ultimate sense, yes, it's being presented to him, and he's saying, yeah, let's go with that. But obviously, he's got to sign the executive orders or the bills or whatever and all that. But I don't get the feeling this is something he came up with on his own. I think this is a kind of a left agenda. It's sort of what Barack Obama wished he'd have got accomplished in his 2 terms but didn't, being put forward. So that's kind of my sense of this whole thing. Again, by the way, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe and forward the links to people, and let's see if we get more people looking at them. I'd like to see whatever comments you have and so forth, because we want to get this out to more people, because that's kind of important. So the other thing that is the deception that keeps being thrown out. I mean, this whole idea, for instance, of calling the voter integrity law in Georgia Jim Crow too. I mean, that's completely false. And apparently Tim Scott has actually managed to back them off on their idea that the U.S. is a racist country. And I think even more, I don't know how that plays into the idea of, quote, structural racism. I mean, that's another issue. I mean, I've previously addressed this issue in which I pointed out that I can't see a structure of racism. In fact, all the structures I see are structures of anti-racism. So, I mean, how can you be structurally racist if all your policies are toward affirmative action, inclusion, and diversity, the organized structural policies, and that somehow the result of that is structural racism? Seems, unless you're saying that the structural racism is against white people, but I don't think that's what they're trying to say. And it's not what I'm trying to maintain either as such, but I'm just saying that the idea is nonsense, basically. And they're continuing to use race as in a false way as a weapon. It really is mainly divisive, because I think people are increasingly just dismissing this as not honest. The other thing was on guns. He made some comment about the Second Amendment. No amendment's absolute and all that sort of thing. But the thing about that, which you have to consider, is that he goes on to say that there were always guns that were banned from the very beginning. Well, when is the beginning? I mean, the ratification of the Second Amendment, which would seem to be what that should imply, and exactly what firearms were banned at the time of the ratification of the Second Amendment. I mean, I certainly can't think of any. I don't know, was it illegal to have a cannon back then if you're a private person? I don't know, is it even illegal to have a cannon now? I'm not sure. I mean, a black powder, kind of cannon, like they, used to use that kind with the ball. I don't know. I already don't know about cannons, but I mean, but back then I doubt there was any such law at all. In fact, I believe that on a national level, I mean, I think it was the actual 1934 perhaps Federal Firearms Act was passed under FDR, is when really the beginning of the modern idea of gun control was really a part of law. I mean, and that was largely around banning machine guns. Well, they weren't even banned. You had to pay a $200 tax, which is still the amount. And of course, at the time, that was a lot of money. Today, that's not that much, but maybe a couple of nights in a cheap motel, or not that cheap, but a middle-class place, or maybe one night in a really fairly nice one. Not the fanciest, of course. I mean, it's not, but at the time that was a real issue. But before then, people could buy like Thompson submachine guns, and people did. That's how the criminals got them mostly, all right? Other than maybe burglarizing National Guard armories. But I think a lot of these things were bought on the open market until that was what that law was at the beginning of. And they also banned things like sawed-off shotguns, which I think the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the law rather than overturning it on the Second Amendment grounds, saying that interestingly enough, that it wasn't part of the usual armament of a military. Then that means, well, the standard Army rifle is covered by the Second Amendment? Well, that slipped away in some later decisions. But the point I'm getting at is that the idea that this was banned from the beginning is nonsense. And so, of course, it has a lot to do with the evolution of personal weapons. But just again, another example of just pure deception on his part. So I don't know. All in all, this is a big spending kind of program, kind of willy-nilly, throwing money at everything they can think of. I presume it's designed to buy votes and also create so many programs that are in place that it will be very difficult to rein them in once they get started, which I guess is the whole idea here. And apparently this is kind of a kamikaze run on their part. They believe that they can do all this stuff, and even if they lose the next congressional election, there's nothing anybody can do to turn it around. Meanwhile, of course, we have the situation on the border. Massive amounts of illegal immigrants flooding across the border. The recent decision to cancel, to basically turn the funding for the wall back to the Pentagon, where the money was transferred over, it indicates there's no intention at all to complete the wall or even parts of it. So for the moment, it looks like we're just going to have a free-for-all of people flooding into the country, with the Border Patrol essentially having the role of facilitating illegal immigration rather than working against it. And of course, there's still a fair number of people that aren't turning themselves into their crossing. We can figure those are probably criminals. So, whereas the ones that are turning themselves in and getting released are probably the ones that are, the children and the families and those people. For the moment, there's not a whole lot of end in sight on this. On a positive note, I would have to say that it looks like at the moment Joe Manchin has taken a pretty strong position against ending the filibuster after briefly sounding like he was wavering, and then he's gone forward to indicate his opposition to adding D.C. as a 51st state, and also the opposition of the idea of the H.R. 1 as written. Now, I don't know how he would want it rewritten, but if he's not going to end the filibuster, I don't think any of those things will then pass for the moment, as long as the current makeup of the Senate is what it is. And it seems like him and Sinema are actually gaining support for their position rather than losing support in terms of their home state vote. I'm sure that Manchin would be. And so, all in all, the situation seems a little bit more stable than we might have thought at the inauguration. We still have the fences around the Capitol and stuff. I think they've scaled it back just a touch, but it's still there. There's still a pretense that there was some insurrection going on, which was more like a riot that was really misguided foolishness by a few militia members and groups like the Proud Boys and so forth. So, a very unfortunate thing that happened, and really unfortunate for President Trump that it happened too. They didn't help him out at all with that, I don't think. So anyhow, and now we have the raid on President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, which is yet another case of launching a raid on one of Trump's attorneys. And one has to, I mean, this is usually kind of a sensitive thing, and I suppose they're trying to claim that he was some kind of a foreign agent or something, even though there's all kinds of unprosecuted people that have literally done what he's being accused of, and he denies he did it. But the people that have literally done it, like Tony Podesta, for instance, literally let go. I mean, we have clearly in D.C. in issues that involve political issues, a two-tiered legal system. It's clearly slanted in favor of the Democrats, and it even when the Republicans have the attorney generalship, it doesn't seem to stop it, because the rank and file professional staff of the Justice Department is just full of Democrats, and it's sort of, unless if the even when somebody like Barr was in, if you stop it, then they say he's working for the president or something, or if you don't stop it, then these unjust events continue to go forward. And that's just sort of the situation. All I could say is, if anybody happens to find themselves on a jury involving one of these cases, you could develop a serious case of reasonable doubt. So that's kind of the scene on that subject, I guess, for the moment. But if we can stop the H.R. 1, if we can stop the adding of states, if we can maintain the filibuster, then what we are stuck with is a massive deficit spending, which will obviously have inflationary tendencies. At this time, it's a little unclear just how bad that will be. I'm kind of two minds on the subject. On the one hand, it looks like there's no way it's not going to be inflationary, and there are signs of inflation, but it's mostly in things like, at the moment, you're seeing items like lumber, for instance, have gone up considerably, and also, of course, gasoline prices are going up, and other things of that sort. And I think also a lot of materials like copper and basic commodities used in manufacturing. And what you might be, the bad side is that just inflation is driving it. On the positive side might be that the demand for all these items had fallen off during the lockdowns, when the economy was shut down for some time. And in fact, even maybe production may have been slowed up even after reopening started, because of depending on what state various things came from, if they're done domestically, and things that are foreign may depend on the situation in those foreign countries. So the pandemic may have actually slowed up production of these items, and now that the demand has gone back more toward normal, all of a sudden the restart of the production doesn't happen immediately, and the inventories quickly decline, and then you have the natural supply and demand drive up with prices. So that's the positive idea, that then once the opening occurs, we hopefully would get to the point where production would then ramp back up as people see the great profit they can make by selling these items, and so they'll flood the market with them, and then the prices will come back down again, and things will be okay. Now, except for probably for energy, like for gasoline, obviously the Biden administration is doing things to inhibit the production and further development of these resources, and so that will probably remain high. And of course, that filters into almost every other aspect of the economy. So ultimately, I think there is an inflationary trend that's going to be worse than we would want, but at the same time, maybe it won't be as bad as it might look right now. We'll just have to, wait and see on that. The bad news is what exactly would the Fed want to do to fight inflation now? I mean, given how massively the country is in debt and going in debt, obviously just increasing the interest rate a small amount would have a devastating effect, on the ongoing deficit. You have a situation where you could have a compounding of debt and interest that would just compound on itself and spiral out of control. So the idea of going to really high interest rates probably is not really an option right now, one would think. And of course, that's not good. So I would say that the people on this ABC poll that are optimistic perhaps should rethink it a little bit. Probably the Rasmussen 36% number I've just seen is probably more likely. But at any rate, that's kind of my thoughts for today, and I just wanted to kind of give you my impressions. I think the first 100 days shows that we're in for a really bad time going forward. And we can only hope that this leads to a massive Democrat election defeat in 2022.